It's 7:30. We promised to start on time, and we promised to end on time. And so we'll start. Yeah, welcome to our Face Up, Face Off. We really appreciate that Ann and Dave gave us the courtesy of showing up. There is what Wendy had figured out. There was probably almost 30% of the primary vote went to more conservative candidates. So 30% of that vote is up for grabs. And that's what we're about tonight. We'd like to introduce who you see on stage besides Ann Ravel and Dave Cortese. We have Wendy Brukwinski. She's our first VP, and she's going to be responsible for asking the questions. And Lisa Sego's is our treasurer, and she's going to be the timer. And so we'll just get down to what our agenda is going to be for the evening. Both Ann and Dave will have 5 minutes to do an introduction of whatever they want to tell us about themselves. And then we're going to have what we call in-depth questions, because you get 2.5 minutes to answer those. And that will be followed by a lightning round where you just answer a one-word answer. So Lisa is our timer, and when you have 30 seconds left on your time, she'll hold up a sign that says 30 seconds. And when your time's up, she'll say stop. Okay, pretty simple. So I think we're ready to get started. So I will turn this over. Well, first I'll ask, well, I got to start with Ann. Since this is the Silicon Valley Association of Republican Women, we might as well let the woman go first. So Ann, you've got 5 minutes to make your case to us.
Thank you very much. I have been in public service, true public service, my entire career. I've worked at the county for 30 years, and then I was appointed by the president, was a deputy assistant attorney general, worked on the oil spill in the Gulf and trying to bring people back from the recession, which I worked on and did accomplish some of that, back in their homes. Came back because Governor Brown appointed me to the chair of the Fair Political Practices Commission, where I was a couple of years. And then I went to the federal government again as the chair and commissioner of the Federal Election Commission. And in all of those jobs, and I've also taught at Berkeley Law School, but in all of those jobs, what I learned was in government, there are not possibilities of getting things done unless you can work with everybody. You cannot have certain biased or extreme positions and insist on just doing that. And I also think you can't just be beholden to certain interest groups in order to get things done. You have to work with people. And that's the hallmark of what I've done. I make decisions based on facts, based on reading about everything, talking to the people impacted, data, and try to make really thoughtful decisions. That's what I had to do as a trial lawyer. That's what I have done in my career. You don't make decisions just based on what someone tells you to do or what some interest tells you to do, in particular unions in this case. So they have been supported, and you mentioned the number of people in the primary who were conservatives. I've been supported by Johnny Camus. He's endorsed me. So has Ken Del Valle. I'm supported by SVO. I'm supported at the state level by the chamber and the more moderate Democrats, because they know that I am willing to talk to everyone in business. I'm not beholden to the unions like my opponent is. And I will tell you, I mean, I think this is striking that he's here today because I've heard from many people who were at a Democratic event that he called me a Republican and said how terrible I was for being a Republican. So, you know, the fact that he might be interested in your endorsement was fascinating to me because honestly, I myself have respect for everybody. And when I'm in the state Senate, I'm going to represent everybody and I'm going to try to do what's best for most people, as many as possible, and not do what's best just in the self-interest of certain individuals or certain groups. So if you want someone who is going to be open-minded, who's going to make decisions that are based on, you know, thoughtful analysis about outcomes, who's going to read the bills. Many people in the state Senate don't read the bills, and I've been told that that's probably true of how my opponent makes his decisions. I will not tell you anything that's false. I will be absolutely honest and transparent with you always, and anybody in your community, all of your members, I am happy to talk to every single one of them about issues that they care about, because that's how you make decisions. You have to listen to people. You have to understand their perspective on issues. And that is exactly what I will do and what I have done throughout my entire career. So I would really hope that you would support my candidacy. I'm
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ann.
I can keep going, but
we got the gist of it. Thank you so much. And your time is just about up. So Dave, you have up to 5 minutes. You don't have to take it all, but you have up to 5 minutes, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jen. Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't called anybody that's left in this race a Republican. It's a Dem on Dem race, and I think it's great that you've invited us here. I mean, you shouldn't stand down just because there's 2 Democrats left in the top 2 here. Your voters, someone's going to be representing you in the state Senate, and one of 40 in senators in the 5th largest economy in the world. And my experience here, especially being an elected official in nonpartisan politics now since full-time, since I was 45 years old, you know, when I moved out of my business career full-time into City Hall in San Jose full-time, you know, here we often work across the aisle. You know, the Supervisor Mike Wasserman and I, because we both come from business backgrounds, if you were a fly on the wall and you listen to us work in closed session or even in many of the open sessions, you'll hear us analyze and walk through issues in a very similar way. So, you know, this is Northern California. We have people that by and large get along regardless of party politics or faith tradition or ethnicity or gender or any of those issues that unfortunately have become much more divisive, I think, at a national level. I'm a Democrat. I make no qualms about that. My family at large was always a split. I grew up in, there happens to be a photo back here. This wasn't a prop. I have my photo in my little office here of my grandfather, Vince Cortese, who was my mentor, you know, who was a Republican, as were all of his children except for my father. My father became a Democrat and an active Democrat at a time in the late 1960s when partisan politics was starting to shift and split here as it was in other places. So, you know, I grew up with a lot of the basic values of growing up as a farm kid here, mentored by my grandfather in terms of protecting people's property rights, protecting the Bill of Rights, you know, standing up for what's right, which I think are bipartisan values. And I certainly came up with a lot of social justice values, you know, growing up on the East Side with friends who oftentimes had 6 or 7 kids in a household and a mom that was a school bus driver that was on general assistance. You know, that was a fairly typical you know, kind of a grouping for me as a child. So I got to see, you know, a lot of the hardship and a lot of what government can do in terms of safety net services when it needs to, when it really needs to. And we're certainly in a time like that now, of course, because of the pandemic. But as I said, I grew up in an agricultural family, in a farming environment, started working when I was less than 10 years old, started getting my SDI deductions when I was 10 years old because they started paying me by paycheck. And I still get the statement now which says, 1966 were the first contributions, and I was born in 1956. So it gives you an idea how long I've been developing, a good work ethic. I eventually ran my family's real estate business, property management, and development business here, after being in the banking business for 6 years after my undergrad and spending some time in the real estate side of that. And ultimately, while I was doing that, serving on the school board, working my way through law school at night and getting a law degree, I kind of got talked into running for city council on my own home turf, Evergreens, San Jose's District 8, and I won that election. And at that point, you pack up your desk and you move to City Hall because that is a 65-hour-a-week job minimum. I enjoyed doing it for the most part, a lot of hard work. And in 2008, I was elected to the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, which in my experience is even more hours and more time and effort. So I have not resumed to a full-time business career since 2001 when I was elected to City Council. But like I said, at 45 years old, I came in to politics with what I thought was a fresh view on how efficient we would really like government to be, and how we would like to treat the money that comes in and out of our government as if it were our own, because I've been programmed that way, of course, since I was a kid. So I've enjoyed it. I'm running for state senate because I want to work on the big issues that are before us today. Homelessness. I do believe climate is a big issue. I believe that the recovery of our economy is a big issue. And thank you. I see the stop sign. Thank you.
You see the stop sign. Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate the introductory statements. And I will now turn it over to Wendy Brukwinski, who's compiled questions from those that were sent in to us. And we'll be back later.
First question's about education. Dave, you graduated from Bellarmine the same year as my brother-in-law. Sorry, because I have a whole house full of barking dogs here, so I go on mute often if I can. Anyway, you graduated from Bellarmine the same year as my brother-in-law. And Ann, you mentioned once about growing up in Willow Glen, so you might have gone to Willow Glen High like I did. So you both have the benefit of really good education, K through 12 education. But we have kids in our valley that don't even bother logging into Zoom because they don't believe anything good comes out of school. California, while in the top for spending per student, is now 49th in the nation in quality of education. What's the problem? How do we fix it? And let's start with Dave on that one.
Well, I have to say that I don't understand California's per pupil spending average to be as high as what you're saying. So we might have a difference of fact.
20 or something like that.
We're pretty low. We're in the, not only in the bottom tier, but the last number I heard was that we were 43rd in per pupil spending in the country, relative to other states. And that's a problem. We don't have equalization of funding in our schools. And, that's something dramatically different between even amongst the various school districts in this county. And I believe that needs to be straightened out. When I was a District 8 City Council member during a time of recession like we're in now, I had my District 8 Community Roundtable come to me and say, look, we want you to take a petition to the governor and argue for more per pupil spending in our district, because the Evergreen District had been built, on pre-Prop 13 property tax values when it was all orchards, like when I was a kid. And I said, well, I'll go if you go with me. And so we started a bus trip to Sacramento, which has grown to the point where we couldn't do it this year, but last year we brought 5 busloads of folks from every walk of life and every political party, neighborhood folks, even kids, young people on field trips, to go up there and take over a committee room and have our legislators come in one at a time and stand and deliver, but answer questions about how they're going to make it better for these kids, in terms of funding equalization, in terms of restoring transportation funding, and and restoring the arts, restoring school sports, and restoring a lot of things that have been cut over the years. And as money has become available, frankly, it hasn't gone back to restore those programs that were cut back in the day. We have one of the lowest apprenticeship program ratios per pupil in this state of any state in the union. I don't know why. I believe that that kind of work needs to be done. We need to get back to applied learning. I would like to open up the ed code. It's been promised for 30 or 40 years. I mean, the original charter movement was supposed to inform restructuring in the ed code. We got to get back to that kind of thinking, a collaborative approach to making our schools better.
Thank you. Anne, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would. We clearly have unequal education because of school funding. That is the case because certain districts are basic aid and some districts the poorer ones and some districts are property tax, and those tend to do better generally. But and that should be changed. School funding should be changed. And it is really interesting because a lot of people who talk about school funding say, oh, the per pupil funding is so low. Well, actually, the reason that the per pupil funding is low in this state compared to others is because in California, the money that goes to schools actually also goes to pay teacher retirement and for other teacher, including the teachers that are there. And there is a huge backlog of that. And so my view is that money should never be taken out of the schools. The money that goes to schools should go to pupils. It should go to students. And so for it to be diverted to pay for teacher retirement is wrong. It should pay also for, however, of course, for teachers' salaries. But I believe that that money really needs to come out of CalSTRS, and there has to be a separate way to fund that so that it is not taken from students. But also, I mean, I have friends who are on school boards, and I have a lot of supporters on school boards, and it is quite the case that there is a lot of resistance by teachers and teachers' unions to be doing some of the things that they need to be doing more creatively for children. And in my opinion, the schools are run for the students. They need to be able to have great educations to be able to succeed. But unfortunately, a lot of the more experienced teachers aren't willing to go to some of the more low-income schools. And so they get new teachers who aren't very experienced and don't know what they're doing and are learning on those kids who really need that help and need really good teachers to be able to support them. So I think that the schools have to restructure for more creativity to give learning to kids at every level about what they can actually learn and do it for each child instead of maths.
Okay, thank you. Interesting answers, thanks. Okay, and this next question segues right into what you were just talking about. It's on unfunded liabilities. I have a friend who was a CHP officer. He retired at 57 and will receive 100 grand every year, over 100 grand for the rest of his life. I read we're in debt by as much as $7 billion. How to fix this, and does it make sense to sponsor bills like millionaires' taxes when they can vote with their feet so much easier than the rest of us? Let's start with Anne on that one.
Yes, well, I think that our debt, our liability for both CalPERS as well as CalSTRS is enormous. And a lot of that comes from the fact that there was not a lot of thoughtfulness on the part of local public officials who were willing to, and also at the state, who were influenced by unions and therefore gave certain kinds of benefits that really were not benefits that were sustainable. I know I now live in Los Gatos, and Los Gatos had their officers from and other employees all retired at the age of 50 at almost full salary, and they all got, including their spouses, lifetime medical, and they never had to actually also get on Medi-Cal or Medicare when they were 65. The the town continued to pay. And it's things like that that a lot of local public agencies did because they needed to compete for officers in particular. And there are among us here people who get a lot of money from law enforcement and the law enforcement unions, my opponent. And as a result, that's what happens when they are doing, whatever the unions want them to do. And we have to be more fiscally prudent. That's all there is to it. And the state is going to have a lot of difficulty trying, and local governments as well, trying to pay off that huge amount of deficit.
Okay, thank you. Dave, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. And first of all, this whole idea of being beholden to unions is, it's not something I'm going to respond to directly unless you want me to talk about that directly. I think it's just kind of a cheap shot, but especially coming from somebody who just said that they spent 30 years on the county government payroll and earned exactly the kind of a pension that she's describing and saying is too costly for others to have. I want people to have secure retirement. If Social Security was adequate for all of you and for me to live on here, I'd be the first to say that should be enough. But the fact of the matter is we've had to create to be competitive. Far before my time, local governments had to create secure retirement packages to attract, the kind of people that you would want in a local government, to keep your emergency rooms open, to operate on people at Valley Medical Center, to deal with a pandemic emergency like we're in now. Those doctors don't come over and work at the county because it's the best place for them to make the most money. And over the years, those packages, and the same with attorneys. Again, I don't begrudge in that. To have quality people come over and work in the county counsel's office who could be working in a private law firm, earning 3 or 4 times, if not more, the per hour wage. You're going to have to put a package together that's competitive. And in order to do that, you got to make sure you have the money to pay for it. And what governments had done, certainly before my time, and certainly at the state level, not just the local level, was at times play games with how much they were funding those retirement packages out of their general funds in order to hold money back to try to pay for tough times like we're in now. And you just can't do that. You can't rob Peter to pay Paul. When you do that, you get behind and it becomes extraordinarily difficult to catch back up. These are big numbers. And I'm proud to say at the county, thanks to the leadership of the whole board, including one of my colleagues, who arrived on the scene about half a dozen years ago and said, let's catch up on this unfunded liability right now. Let's throw everything we have at it. And we did. And we got that caught up. And most local governments since 2007 have made huge strides in that regard. But the state, it's going to be tough there with this deficit to do both. And it's going to take that kind of experience to go up there and say, we can't shortchange these retirement packages. If we're going to owe the money on them, we have to set that money aside.
Thank you. Yeah, good answers, both of you. Thanks. Okay, next question is going to be on energy. What should the state legislature do to prevent these rolling blackouts from continuing in light of the fact that the state's taken action to shut down Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, banning natural gas? I think we've shut down 13 plants already or something like that. And they haven't built any new hydroelectric generating dams in over 30 years. How are we going to make sure that we have enough power going forward? And let's start with Dave on that one.
Well, first of all, I'm a clean energy guy, and I was instrumental in helping create Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Some of you may be getting your power through Silicon Valley Clean Energy now through your PG&E bill, because the 14 cities, not San Jose, the 14 cities in the county that are not part of San Jose are part of that program now. And a lot of that power is generated in other ways, through alternative sources. But it's something that we need to pay attention to if we're going to move toward electrification more and more and more, is to make sure that the sources of that electrification are not powered by fossil fuels themselves. And And some of the things that you cited as possibilities for power generation that are not fossil fuel based are going to need to be looked at and explored in the future, to make sure that we have enough power to avoid shortages. Water and power, are the Achilles heels, the two Achilles heels of this state. And a lot of people don't realize that. We have to pay attention to that, whether or not it's in the top 5 or the top 10 polling issues that people are interested in. We can't expect the general public, while they are working their own jobs, to have their eye on what's happening with Pacific Gas and Electric and the other utilities, what's happening with basic power generation and capacity, and what's happening with water. Because the moment you can't turn your faucet on because somebody decides we have to start rationing water, and we don't have desalination plants, which we don't, except perhaps one in the entire state, I think people are going to be upset that elected officials didn't grab the bull by the horns and say, let's get this infrastructure built while we can before it's too late. So that's my mentality about it. I do think there will be capital money available even during this big deficit, because the problem at the state level in terms of the deficit is operating dollars. To take capital dollars out of capital accounts that are there to build things, bricks and mortar, is a good thing. It's counter-cyclical investment. It will create jobs. It'll put people to work, and it will help build the infrastructure you're talking about.
Great, thank you. Anne?
Yes, I believe that the state needs to invest in, for example, larger batteries and ways to actually contain that electric power. Because now, I mean, the problem is, as you said, there's insufficient electricity. And unfortunately, a lot of homes even that have solar power, in times when there are blackouts, they don't have anything. So it's really problematic that the state has not done enough investment since because of the wildfires and because of other reasons. We have not done enough to invest in the kind of alternative energy that we need and that we should have. I absolutely think that that is the way we have to go forward. Although I am not opposing natural gas, which, as it turns out, they're able to have natural gas that is really clean. And that's the reality of where we are now. We're using those materials, and it's going to be some time before we're going to get to all electrification. And so for those reasons, we should not be too quick to try to remove those sources of energy that will create more problems for us. And so that is important to me, because, I mean, for one thing, people are quite willing to say these things about how quickly we have to get there, and we should, but everybody's driving, everybody's cooking, people need energy now, and we cannot divest ourselves of it so quickly that it is going to create even worse crises for the public in California.
Okay, great, thank you. Good answers, you two, thanks. Small business, especially in light of the COVID crater we find ourselves in, what steps would you two take to assure survival of small businesses, if you do believe in small business? And do you believe in reviving the gig economy? And while perhaps ticking off the unions, maybe repealing AB 5? Let's see, who starts first there? Dave?
You want me to start first again?
Oh no, let's do Anne if I did you last time, sorry.
Well, I believe that AB 5 was one of the worst pieces of legislation I have ever seen written, and I read a lot of legislation. First off, it did not do what the Supreme Court actually said. It was a pretext, and in fact, it had consequences that have been devastating to people who want to work independently. And in this state, the largest number of people who have lost their jobs after AB5 are low income, Latinos, and African Americans. And it's wrong. And the way that the AB5 worked was essentially, oh, someone comes to lobby the legislature, okay, we'll let them out. But we won't let somebody else that's similarly situated. As a result, musicians, actors, small theaters have had to close. And in terms of small business, I am a strong supporter of small business. I think that it's very important for this state because small business actually employs far more people than any other business in the state, including in this valley where, we do have tech industry, but small business is a much larger employer. And I myself have strong feelings about supporting them, giving them incentives, giving ways to keep them going. I don't believe in the economic theories of, oh, they should go under because they're obviously not viable anyway. That's not true. And what happened in COVID was something that has really been devastating to small business. And frankly, with the measure on the ballot to have the split roll, it's going to be more devastating because small businesses are not going to be able to afford those taxes. They're not going to pay them anyway. They're going to send them down to their people who are their renters and others. And it's going to make more people lose their jobs at a time when small business is already devastated.
Okay, thanks. Dave?
Yeah, I almost lost track of the question, but let me take a stab at it. I took the question as what is my posture towards small businesses? And I think through the history that I gave you during my opening, it was fairly evident that I came up as a small business person, spent really 20 plus years as a business person in this community prior to joining the city council at 45 years old. I served on the Eastside High School board while I was raising a family, while I was working my way through high school in the 90s, and while I was in the last of the 15 years that I full-time ran our businesses, which were retail, which included a restaurant, which included rental property, which still included one of the oldest family farms. We used to call it the fruit stand, but everyone else called it a country store out on San Felipe Road by the villages. So I know all of that. I know how hard it is to make a payroll. I've had to make payroll. I've had to go down to the bank and ask them to cover my payroll for a couple hours until revenues came in. When you've had that kind of experience, how important it is to support small businesses and to make sure that they're not overregulated. And 60% of our employment and our productivity here in this county, according to UCLA economists, comes from small business, not from the tech sector, which surprises a lot of people. So it's hugely important. I know AB5 was mentioned. I support AB5, but it's a work in progress. I thought it was a very kind of a clumsy process getting that bill put together because it wasn't clear right from the beginning if they were going to exempt realtors who had traditionally been independent contractors or truckers or different sectors. And I think some sectors, especially on the gig side, got caught up in that, and it still needs to be straightened out to some extent. But the flip side of it is I don't support Prop 22, which is essentially a carve out for one sector, saying, here's how they'll be treated separately and differently from what should be comprehensive statewide legislation. I feel just as strongly about opening up the employment code and fixing those problems as I do about fixing the education code like we talked about earlier. And I think that's the right way to do it.
Okay, yeah, AB5 is starting to look like a Swiss cheese, actually. There's so many carve-outs in it. Okay, next question is about housing. I've heard there are laws being concocted about allowing developers to build 4 or 8 plexes like right next door with no parking. I've also heard that these laws are based on what seems to be very inflated numbers of housing units needed, like maybe 3 times what we actually need. Do you agree with putting zoning in the hands of the state and taking it away from local jurisdictions? Do you support state constructed and state owned housing, and thoughts on housing density? And let's see, first off would be Dave.
No, be me this time. I supported SB 50 once the amendments were made and once it was clear that the language was right in the front end of the bill that said it was going to respect local general plans and local zoning. And when parking was local control over parking was included in the background of the bill, when height restrictions were included in the intent of the bill, and when it was further clarified where jobs-rich and transit-rich communities really were, because they aren't in the middle of some of our little suburban burgs that we live in, where there's not a lot to develop except the single family that's there. But that said, I thought the bill that died was actually a pretty good bill after all the work that was done to amend it. One of the bills that also died this session was Pro Tem Tony Atkins' bill, and I think that bill could be adjusted quite a bit to make a huge difference, almost tweaked really to make a huge difference, to let people build accessory dwelling units on their large single family lots, without worrying about lot splits and demolition and some of the things that the bill talks about that frankly I think scare the heck out of people because they don't know where that's going to go, how that's all going to come out, and whether or not there's going to be enough design control at the local level. But when you're just talking about speeding up the process and cutting the fees, cutting the red tape so that someone can put a granny unit on their larger lot, if we can't do that, we're going to have a housing crisis for a long time. And I do believe we have a housing crisis. I don't know if the numbers are exactly what Planned Bay Area says they are, because those are projections. But best case scenario is not good right now. It's pretty well proven that we've been creating jobs at a 6-to-1 ratio over housing over the last 10 years, and that's not sustainable. So housing has to go in the right place. It still needs to be under local general plan and zoning, but anything the state can do to streamline those processes, I think, is a good thing under the circumstances in the housing crisis that we're facing.
Okay, thanks. Anne, would you like to comment?
I feel strongly that because of the fact that there are a lot of communities that really do not have the character, cannot accommodate large developments, that local zoning is extremely important and needs to remain, because unless people have the ability to weigh in on how their community is going to look, I think that it's unfair. It doesn't let them live in a place where they feel pride in their neighborhoods. And I think people do feel that way, very emotionally attached to their neighborhoods. But we do have a housing problem. There is no question that we need more affordable housing. And I believe that it's appropriate to put that housing close to transit. The way that SB 50 was written was so unclear and had no description of what was a jobs-rich area. And it also, in its first incarnation that my opponent agreed to himself and supported, it was requiring a certain height in every place. And that I don't think is appropriate at all. Of course, ADUs, everybody agrees with ADUs. The law has already accepted ADUs. We can build ADUs, and that is something people should have the rights to do. I think the state does need to invest in modular housing and less expensive housing so that it can be built in places for people who actually are needing affordable housing, so that we can have teachers, we can have firefighters, we can have people that we want to remain in our community, but we have to make sure that all of the areas where they're placed are areas where it is appropriate for the community. And I absolutely agree. I haven't gotten my 30-second done yet, but I think that the design is also very important, that it fits in with the neighborhood. And I'm a strong believer in democracy. People have a right to weigh in.
Okay, thank you. All right, next one's about the middle class. While accounting for about 20% of the state's population, our San Francisco Bay Area contributes 40% of all personal property taxes, which is a huge amount of revenue for the state. I have 2 kids working here remotely from my house with very portable jobs. Actually, one is in Montana right now, the other is headed for Denver, and they just take their computers with them and work. They could make that permanent. So are you concerned about the number of middle-class people leaving the state, and what impacts do you foresee, because so many people seem to be moving out these days? And let's start with Ann.
I am really concerned about the middle class people moving. I'm concerned about businesses moving. I think that we have to have a community that everyone can live in. And so without any question, we need to make sure that everyone has the wherewithal to be able to live in our community, and where it's not so, and obviously we need taxes. That's the one mechanism that's been used, but I don't think that we should continue to elevate the sales taxes and the other taxes that are so high for people that it's not something that young people in particular are leaving in droves, because as you said, or whoever's question that was, so I think we really need to be more thoughtful. And I know that my opponent hasn't seen a tax that he doesn't like, but I think we have to be thoughtful now about that, because it is time to try to assure that all people can live here. And those kinds of taxes, sales taxes, they are regressive. And we do not want to have a community where our grandchildren can't live, where my children had to move out for those same reasons because it was so expensive to live here. That's just not what we need. And we need all those people who are the teachers, the baristas, all the people who make our lives what they are, to be able to afford to live here. And I'm very concerned that instead what we're going to have is at the extremes. And I know a lot of businesses are moving. I know I heard just today Palantir that has decided to move to Colorado, I believe, and with lots of employees they had here are leaving because of those kinds of things. So we've got to encourage business to stay, and we've got to that hire some of these people who are middle class.
Okay, thanks. Dave?
Yeah, I think we're at a crossroads, in the state. Let's face it, we've had historic fires going on. We're in the middle of a pandemic, which at times and in some of the counties has been managed well, but on a statewide basis, hasn't always been our best day. And people have died, and people have gotten sick, and people have had their livelihoods destroyed by fire, and that's still going on to this moment. And people are reading about us in other states inhaling toxic fumes, whether you're involved directly in wildfires or not. So we have a lot of work to do, and the question is going to be, I think, how do you generate revenue from the big revenue producers that create jobs by continuing the growth of the economy and moving that back forward as quickly as we can coming out of this pandemic, because the wildfire plan for the state is going to cost money. And we're not going to pass a revenue measure right now. I'll be the first to acknowledge that, to put a wildfire plan together, not because people don't want fire safety, but because people can't afford it right now. And we're in the depths of a recession. We're not going to be able to buy our way or pay our way out of the costs of business tenancies and residential tenancies that have gone in the wrong direction because people couldn't afford to pay their rent. We're going to need federal help with that. And I don't like the fact that I'm at that my federal tax rate is as high as it is. I don't like that. I don't like looking at my property tax bill and seeing how much is coming out of it. And I think a lot of Californians are in that mode right now, and they're thinking, what happened to this state that was the state that I moved into 20 or 30 years, or that I grew up in. And the state in that era was a state of business growth, of business expansion. And to do that, you have to have the infrastructure that you were talking about earlier. And frankly, we can't underestimate this housing crisis. I know somebody said earlier, the numbers might not be right, but if we choke off business growth because we don't have the housing to house our own workforce, it's going to be a big mistake in terms of the growth of this economy in California. And we'll be in a downward spiral if we're not already.
Okay, thanks. The last in-depth question I have for you two has to do with the family and what your thoughts are. SB 145 was just endorsed by Governor Newsom a couple days ago. This is the bill that allows 24-year-olds to be intimate with 14-year-olds without being added to the sex offenders registry. As an aside, I've been told that Wiener claims that this bill removes discrimination for penalties between the LGBTQ and the straight community, although when I read all the different versions, I cannot find any discrimination there. So I'm kind of thinking that might be a bogus claim. But what are your thoughts on this bill about the 10-year span and where we're headed in that direction? And let's see, I think we start with Dave on that one.
Okay, yeah, and I'm not yet familiar with the bill. I honestly am not. If it's really about a level playing field for the LGBTQ community, meaning treat them the same as however the law is treating everyone else right now, then it would be very compelling for me to support that. I don't think we should be discriminating one group of people or another over gender or sexual orientation or ethnicity or anything else in terms of how the laws are actually applied, especially criminal law. I don't know if that bill deals with what it deals with in terms of the accountability that you would have to have for that kind of a crime or an action or a mistake or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if they're restorative justice measures or if there's some other kind of accountability, but there has to be accountability for those actions. If we're dealing with a situation that's clearly a statutory rape because of age differential, there has to be accountability and consequences for that. And I think we can argue about what those should be exactly, but they should be equal for everyone, and they should be truly accountable.
Thanks. Ann?
I too have not read the bill, and I know that Senator Wiener has claimed that there was that distinction. And if there is such a distinction, then I would be concerned, but you're shaking your head and say that it hasn't been and that there isn't one. And frankly, if there is no distinction, if it does not treat different people differently, which is a concern that I have about legislation just generally, I certainly would support the idea that there could not be that kind of interaction between either male on male, female on female, or male on female. It's just inappropriate, and I don't think it should be supported.
Okay, thanks.
Pretty clear. You don't have to say much about it, really.
You two are making this difficult to pick between you two. It's hard. Okay, we've reached the end of our in-depth questions, and now we're going to move on to the lightning round. What I'm looking for here is like off the top, one-word answers. And we're just curious, we just want to hit a bunch of topics here and see what your thoughts are. There's no right answers here. We're just curious what you think. Okay, let's start with Dave on this one. Dismantle Prop 13, yes or no?
No.
Okay, Ann?
No. Yes. No.
You want to dismantle Prop 13?
No, I don't.
Okay. Do you believe in Black Lives Matter, Ann?
I think that Black lives do matter. Oh, yes or no?
Yes or no?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Dave?
Yes.
Okay. Dave, charter schools, yes or no?
I'm fine with charter schools.
Okay, Ann?
I support charter schools.
Good answer. Okay, Ann, defund the police.
No.
Dave?
I'm not, that's a definitional issue, but I'm going to say yes, based on what I understand the issue to be.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe I should have elaborated on a question there. Okay, Dave, build the site's reservoir for water storage, yes or no?
I don't have a position on that. I'm sorry.
Okay, Ann?
You know, I don't know enough about the Sykes Reservoir, but I think that we need reservoirs for storage.
Okay, that was essentially what I was getting at. Do we want to save water? Do we
Yeah.
want to recycle water? Do we want to? Okay,
All of the above, but we want to save it.
okay. And Dave, do you have a position on that?
I think
Water storage versus?
I like water storage. I like desalination, and I think we have to get away from groundwater pumping soon.
Okay, all right, thanks. Cash bail, yes or no? Let's see, who starts first? I think it's Ann, right?
Well, I think I was first on the last one, but that's okay. I know you can't say yes or no to this one either, because frankly, if we have cash bail, which I'm fine with, it has to be equal in the sense of what the crime is. That is, the rich shouldn't be able to pay and get out for the same crimes. That's the difference.
Okay, Dave?
Cash bail, yes. I'm sorry, cash bail, no. I'm supportive of a risk-based system.
Okay, so you are for whatever that proposition is.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Does California, this is for you, Dave, does California have adequate gun control laws?
I think we have some of the most stringent gun control laws in the country. I'm not sure what more could be done in terms of regulating hardware. I do think that the laws regarding felons possessing guns need to be enforced. And I think there's a whole bunch of work that can be done there. And I'm sorry, I forgot we were in a lightning round for a moment.
Okay, good answer. And do you have an answer to that one?
We need some stronger laws, but I think it has to do more with what's sensible to do. And it's not the laws for most people who own guns. It's for their private guns. It's for safety, and it's for automatic weapons and the like, and how they're defined.
So we need stronger gun control.
Yeah.
Okay, should we repeal the 1996 Prop 209 Equal Rights Initiative, Ann?
Yes.
Dave?
Yeah, that's Prop 16. I support it.
Okay. Is cow flatulence a mortal threat to our world? Dave? Sorry.
I don't believe so.
Ann?
Not mortal. No.
Okay. All right. This leads into one of the questions down here. Ann, Green New Deal, yes or no?
I don't define it the way that it's defined in the federal level, but I do think we have to try to put people to work in green jobs.
Okay, Dave?
Yes, I'm a clean energy advocate, and I think we should be very aggressive in that regard.
Okay. Should parents be allowed to opt kids out of sex ed in school? Dave?
No.
Ann?
You know, I don't care. Honestly.
Oh, okay.
I'd
All right.
say, you know, sure. I mean,
Okay. Yes or no, Ann, more logging and prescribed burns to prevent wildfires?
yes.
Dave?
That's Yes, that's part of the solution.
Okay. Okay. Dave, state ownership of PG&E, good or bad?
I never supported state ownership of PG&E. I have supported alternative ownership of PG&E, some other form of public ownership in the past. I think that day has passed now because of the post-bankruptcy situation that we're in with PG&E.
Yeah, that could come around again though.
It
Okay.
may.
Anne? Definitely not state ownership. It shouldn't be public ownership. You know, it's hard enough to run the state, much less PG&E. I think what they require is oversight from the PUC and the state legislature that hasn't existed.
Okay. Mandatory health care for all, Anne.
I think that there should be health care available and accessible for everybody, but it's not a mandatory, you have to do this kind of health care versus something else. It is not one size fits all.
Okay, Dave.
I support universal health care. So if that's what you're describing, it would be a yes.
Okay. Mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations, Dave.
Yes.
Anne?
No.
Okay. School choice, Anne.
Yes.
Dave?
No.
Okay. Healthcare for residents who are not here legally, Dave.
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Okay. And right to work, Anne?
You know, I'm not clear how that's being defined. How do you define that?
The right to work without joining a union.
Ah, okay. Yes.
Dave?
No.
Okay. All right. My last question, silly. Coke or Pepsi? Dave?
Seltzer water.
There you go.
Pepsi.
Anne?
Pepsi.
Pepsi if you have to pick.
Yeah.
And you have a choice?
Pellegrino.
Yeah,
It's
there you go.
so long since I've had either Coke or Pepsi. I couldn't
I
distinguish.
know. Yeah. Okay, we have reached our final question. And thank you so much for sitting through this. Final question. It's safe to assume that everyone on this call, except maybe 2 people, are very avid Trump supporters. When he wins again in November, as a state senator, how will you approach his insistence on outlawing the sanctuary state? And let's start with Dave on that one.
Well, I think states' rights have, been vindicated, and so far in the 3.5 years that Mr. Trump has been president, with regard to how states deal, with what the federal government's calling sanctuary policy. So I've supported the Values Act at the state level. I've certainly supported my own county's efforts to maintain, no registries at all on ethnicity, on status, on partisanship, on anything. We don't keep registries. We serve people indiscriminately, and that's my general position.
Okay, thanks. And Anne?
I would not support it just from the federalism standpoint as well. I mean, it's the state internally can make the decisions that relate to those kinds of issues on their own. And I, as a matter of, sort of legal analysis and belief in the democratic rights, that's how our constitutional system is set up. And I do not think that the president should interfere with that.
Okay, thank you too.
Well, we really, can I just say something? I heard, states' rights keep out, but we want to be bailed out by the federal government. So,
That's because we're sending more money to the federal government than any state in the union. And we would like to get as much of that back as possible, especially when we're going through a pandemic and wildfires and other catastrophes. So, but I understand your point.
So we really appreciate both Ann and Dave being here, and thank you for your time. We'll give you each 1 minute to give us a closing statement, and we'll start with Dave.
Well, again, thank you for having us, and thank you for your interest. I mean, you certainly could have said, hey, we're Republican women. We're just not going to take an interest in this race. Certainly others have done that in some other different sectors. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and, you know, engage and talk. And hopefully I'll be representing you, and hopefully we'll have much more dialogue in the future. What I'm really hoping for is that Three Flames will open and I can come visit you as your state senator and have, you know, good dialogue, civil dialogue about some of these same issues and whatever the issues of the day are. So again, thank you. And, you know,
Well, we hope whoever wins, whether it's Dave or Ann, you'll come and join us at Three Flames for a meeting. We like to have that. And Ann, do you want to give us your final statement?
I do. I mean, I didn't say it at the beginning, but Wendy and I both went to Woodland High School. I grew up here when we moved here at the age of 11, and I really cared deeply about this area, and I cared deeply about making sure that all people are able to live here and thrive here. And so anything that I can do to do that, including supporting business, supporting small businesses, to make sure that people are employed and that we have a strong middle class, is what I would do. And I also spend a lot of time talking to people, and I reached out to you because I wanted to talk to you, because I believe in talking to everybody. I'm not going to stop talking to people because I disagree with them on certain issues. I will always talk to you, hear you out, and try to come to a reasonable accommodation that you and I can feel comfortable with. So I know I'm told to stop, but I want you to know I'm happy to give you my email, and you can connect. I think you have my email, because
We have your email, and if
email me, and you can give it out to your members and they can contact me.
I'm sure they'd be happy to contact. I'm watching all the little Q&As and chats, and I'm sure they have many questions that have not been answered.
I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And I think we tried to stick to our 1 hour, and we appreciate your time. And hey, we're looking forward to seeing how the race turns out. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
all right. Be safe.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.